News. My name is Ellis Palmer. These days I'm a journalist at BBC. However, between 2012 and 2016, I studied political science and Hispanic studies here at the wonderful University of Birmingham. I was also the disabled students officer as well in my time here. Go Guild, yay! Right, so kicking off, we've got 3 sections. Theme 1 is academic experience, theme 2 is student voice, and theme 3 is value for money. So basically, I'm going to introduce our wonderful and esteemed panel for the evening and then throw to your questions, so don't hold back. First up is the Vice Chancellor, Professor David Eastwood. He has been in the post since April 2009. He's the guy or person who makes the most senior decisions in the whole of the university. He chairs the university's executive board, which is responsible for the management of the university, and unfortunately, he's a Manchester United fan. Second up is the Pro-Vice Chancellor for Education, Kathy Armour. She oversees all aspects of undergraduate and postgraduate taught education. She basically is the person who has anything to do with the quality of our learning and teaching environment here at the University of Birmingham. And she's responsible for delivering the university's strategic plan for education. So the new academic teaching year, so semesterization and everything like that. Next up is the academic registrar, the wonderful Stephen McAuliffe. He is responsible for the overall management and strategic direction for academic services and improving student experiences. Just to recap on what academic services are, because I have absolutely no idea. They are library services, academic affairs, the Careers Network, the Birmingham International Academy, student services and innovation and development, as well as the student hub, counselling, equality and diversity, and all those wonderful things. And finally is Paddy Jackman. Paddy is the interim director of hospital and accommodation services. So he's the person who makes the most senior decisions about university accommodation, so the prices and facilities, and is also the guy who deals with meal plans and catering services around the campus, so prices and the quality of food, etc. So that gets me into your questions, kind of the main event of the evening. To kick things off, theme 1 is on academic experience. Questions, guys? Yep. Sorry, just to say, can we wait until the microphone has come before we start the questions, just because it's easier for my hearing aids and it's easier for the lovely people at Guild TV as well. Thank you very much. Kick it off.
The academic experience, I think, unfortunately, as many people know here, has been marred, despite the best efforts of the staff, by the mass casualization that has gone on. They're underpaid, overworked, despite, of course, how the staff in front of us on the panel have no problem with their wages or remunerations, as our Vice-Chancellor likes to say, whatsoever. There is a crisis amongst the actual teaching staff. And what will this mass casualization be stopped? And what will be done in general about it?
Professor Eastwood, would you agree with the characterization of a crisis within teaching staff at the university?
No, I wouldn't. Thank you for the question. This is the university, and actually this has made the biggest investment of any university I know over the last 3 years in new staff. So if you look at new faculty, we've hired a net additional 500 new faculty over the last 3 years. That's part of a commitment on the part of the university to the quality of teaching and to ensuring that our great students are taught by the best faculty we can recruit. If you look at the people who are not on permanent contracts, there are a variety of people. Some of them bring specialist skills that we wouldn't otherwise have, giving our students experience and perspectives, say, from industry. A large number of them are our postgraduate research students, giving them experience of teaching and enabling them to establish and develop their teaching careers here. And right across the university, each year we ask our colleges and our heads of school to look at the teaching establishment that they need to ensure that what we deliver is a high-quality experience to all of our students. There will always be in a university like this a number of staff who are on fixed-term contracts. Many of them will be our doctoral students, and it's important that doctoral students are given the opportunity to teach where that's appropriate, but also appropriately remunerated for the teaching that they deliver. But Cathy, you might want to add to that.
I think we've taken the development of our staff more seriously than almost any other university. We've got a new institute for the development of our staff. All of our postgraduate students who teach also are engaged in training, and also we see that as a really important starting point for many of them. In fact, it's where I started, as an opportunity to gain some experience, but also our students gain enormously from interacting with our PhD students, because that's where we connect our research and teaching, obviously, in a very visceral way. So. No, I don't recognise what's being said, and I think given we see the outcomes of the quality of teaching in our student surveys, it's really high in the sector. So, I wouldn't accept everything that's been said, but I know there is that viewpoint.
To the student who asked that question, do you want to redirect on what Professor Eastwood and Professor Armour have said, or?
Well, they've been very good at answering the question, of course. Hiring new staff is somehow related to not paying. Because I didn't deny that you were hiring staff, you're just not treating those you have very well at all. Given those long answers that I'm sure were intended for us to not ask anyone, because I don't think any of us want to hear any more about that. But I believe that there are some casualised lecturers here who might have more to say on the topic.
Can I ask, is that a question or a statement?
No, that's just a statement, as I said. Please, no more.
Can I ask we keep it to questions, please, because this is kind of Vice Chancellor's question time. Thank you. Next up. Yep. I think they've run to get a mic for you. It's the student here.
Yeah.
Sitting, yeah. Oh, which? Who's got it?
Thank you. I'd just like to first thank you for coming and attending. My question is regarding the SPLD policy. So this is a policy of special learning difficulty screenings. And this policy was made in just this year, and it was actually on Disability Awareness Week. And those who want screenings now for dyslexia, dyspraxia, now have to pay between £300 to £600 for screenings, and I think that's appalling. So my question is, what are we doing about this situation, and what's the reason for this policy, and why was it created? Because if this is a learning environment and we're meant to learn better, I mean, I just don't really see why this was done.
Sure, thank you. Thanks very much for the question. I think the position that we're in is one that echoes across the sector, which is the government has cut the various funding routes for disabled students. They've cut much of what was included in the Disabled Students Allowance that would have paid for a number of these things in the past, and they've cut a lot of the support that was available directly for students. What that's done in some cases has led to a charge in relation to assessments of disability need. That's quite specific in certain categories, and you've highlighted those, and they are where the the approach goes beyond what the university can offer and requires very specialist support, and that's where that charging comes about. What I would say is we do have funding available, so additional funding for students who are in hardship who wouldn't be able to meet some of those costs, and we look at those on a case-by-case basis. But it is a response by the university to a cut across the sector in government funding around support for disabled students.
A little bit of money. I mean, if a screening is £600, and I read on the policy that they can give up to only £325. I mean, come on, when student poverty is going up and up and up, no one's going to be able to afford £300 on top of even when you get the hardship fund. So I think it does need reevaluating, in my opinion. So it's kind of my...
I mean, I think that it's a really good point that you raise in terms of how the hardship fund works. I mean, what I would say is the hardship fund, even with some of those initial limits, we still look on a case-by-case basis. So if when going through in detail with the student, we're able to evaluate how much money they can or can't afford, and we do that in partnership with them, it's not some arbitrary test over here somewhere, it's sitting down and going through it. If we're to identify they require further funding than that, then we'd look to try and see, well, can we do that under the hardship fund?
Yeah, I mean, because this particular thing affected me quite badly, because I was going through some issues at the start of my master's year, and I was told, well, I think you've got dyslexia here. And then I went to these drop-ins, and then they were saying, we're going to assure you to get this screening. Just drop in here, drop in at this time, drop at this. And it just kept going on and on and on. And then it got to January, and then I was in this position where it's like, you're going to have to pay now. And I mean, just the way that I was treated shouldn't be in this university. It shouldn't be going on like this. So in my opinion, the way I was treated was very unfair.
I mean, I'm happy to look at that outside the room. It's very difficult to comment on an individual case without going back through the records to try and understand it. Yeah. I'm sorry for that treatment. That isn't what we would hope to be delivered. It's important that students are able to come forward and access support in a way that's effective for them and indeed manageable for the university. So firstly, I apologise about that experience, and secondly, I'm very happy to look at it in more detail with you.
Okay, nice. Thank you.
Anybody else on the panel wish to answer the next question on academic experience? Anybody?
If not,
Yeah, go on. Sorry. Being this row down sometimes makes it a wee bit...
Can I just say, for all of us at the front, it's actually quite hard to see you at the back. So I think if you want to ask a question, it would be good if you could wave very vigorously, and then we've got a better chance of seeing you.
Or alternatively, we've actually got some seats here at the front, so if people are right at the back and may want to move to the front, that might be a bit easier. No? Okay. Yeah.
Hello. University societies concerned with mental health and various related issues have stepped in to provide support for those...
Slower, please?
Sorry.
Thank you.
University societies concerned with mental health and various related issues have stepped in to provide support for those not being sufficiently helped by welfare services or those on a waiting list. This includes signposting to relevant external services, temporary support and counsel via informal sessions, as well as advice on how to best navigate the uni-run services available. Can students really be having a truly supported academic experience if they are having to shoulder this burden, and how do you propose to address this issue for the coming academic year?
Stephen?
Thanks very much for raising that particular question. We've actually had Redbrick in the past week or so to come and look at the services that the university offers around well-being and support for well-being, because they're substantial. We spend over 1.7 million a year, one of the few universities in the country to spend more than $1 million on supporting student well-being, and have quite a sophisticated system that delivers support through counsellors, through wellbeing officers, through a variety of different staff trained to intervene at different levels. We also have the staff working at school and college level to add and support students with mental health challenges and difficulties. One of the challenges that we face, and I think it's a challenge across the sector actually, it's a challenge for society, is we tend to, when we talk about mental health, we tend to default to the idea that what we need are more counsellors. If students have mental health difficulties, then they need to talk to a counsellor. And my usual question that comes with that is, well, what type of counsellor are we talking about? Are we talking about an EMDR counsellor? Are we talking about a CBT counsellor, psychodynamic, humanistic? Which one? do people want when they say, let's have some more counselling? And actually the point here is that the best way to support student mental health is a variety of different resources. It is not just counselling. It is support to deal with issues that might be triggering mental anxiety and mental health concerns. It is support and activities and opportunities to step out from the day-to-day and the pressure that students may experience, and indeed all of us may experience from time to time. Whether that be taking time to visit and travel around the campus just away from work, whether that be a direct support, or indeed whether that be right through to the support of a counsellor who can spend time working with a student who has particular well-being challenges. We have a target that we meet 85% of students who have non-urgent counselling requirements or counselling needs within 20 working days. That's as opposed to the NHS, which does it in around 140 working days. There's a substantial difference in the quality of what the university offers. Can we do more? Yeah, absolutely. Are we looking to do more? Yes. We're working with the Guild. We have a conference in May working with the NHS, with Forward Thinking Birmingham, and a variety of different partners, including the police, including the GPs in the area, to say how can we connect all this together so students who are struggling can be supported better. Does that mean some people will wait? Yes, it does. The counselling service of the university will never be set up that a student who wants to see a counsellor will see them immediately. The counselling service is, however, set up so that students who need urgent support will be seen within 2 working days. And indeed, we have a drop-in service that means students can be seen the same day. Does it work all the time? No. Occasionally it bumps. Just like any other service you see anywhere else that you access at any other time. But we have a huge number of colleagues working incredibly hard to deliver the best we can, and we're looking forward to doing more of that with the Guild, because the only way really we're going to tackle what is a growing mental health challenge across the country is in partnership, rather than the university offering a responsive service. We invest a lot of money, but we could do more and we can do it together.
Professor Altman?
Yes, and to add to that, the working at the Guild brought to our attention, and a number of students, that actually we were a bit confusing. So, we didn't have the same structure in each school, for example, not the same named tutors with the same roles. So we've completely redesigned that this year so that wherever a student goes, no matter which school or college they're in, they should be going through the same routes. And we've also clarified that in the past, the personal tutor used to kind of double up as a kind of a well-being support person, welfare officer. And again, we feel now, we've had to clarify those roles as to what a personal academic tutor can actually do, is trained to do, and the support they can provide, and when they need to refer on to the wellbeing services. And I think that's been a quite important development, and the Guild really helped us with that.
Does the student who asked the question wish to redirect?
I guess then we can attest to the fact that the university believes it's made significant improvement, but can we not also say then that there is a significant issue with student perception of welfare services, given the fact that many students feel disheartened by the welfare structure, despite the apparent efforts that have gone into changing this?
I think that is a point well made, and it's something that we picked up last year. I think the part of the challenge that we have is the twin challenge. Stephen's referred to the difficulty students find in accessing NHS support. And also, of course, for many students, they've not been able to access support in pre-18 education. So what we're finding that the interventions that we're making and the support that we're putting in place is constantly challenged. So that goes to Stephen's point. Is there more that we can do? Yes, undoubtedly there is more that we can do. That will involve some hard choices around priorities for investment in supporting students. They're choices that we will, I think, have to make.
And by hard choices, what do you mean?
Well, they're hard choices because there are other things that we can't then spend money on.
Like?
Ultimately, if we made a commitment when the new student funding system came in, that all of the income that we get for education, for undergraduate education, would be spent on students. So if you look at the range of other student facilities that we are trying to develop, our staff-student ratios, the investment that we were making in staff that I was talking about a moment, ultimately there are trade-offs. We are actually, we're proud of what we have done, because I think in a number of ways, and Stephen made this point, I think we're leaders, actually, in the support that we give to students with mental health challenges. The difficulty we have at the moment, and I think we all accept this, and I absolutely accept the premise of the question, which is that the need is outstripping the support that we can make available. So what we will do in the short term is try and target it as effectively as we can, and what we will do in the longer term is to make sure we've got the right level of investment. The final thing I would say is, of course, there are lags in the investment that you make and the appointments that you can make and the resource that you can put in on the ground. So we found that last year, and to some extent we're finding it again this year. But what I hope we've managed to do this year, as Kathy Armour was saying, is address some of the issues around signposting, some of the issues around whether challenges that they present are academic challenges or they're challenges around well-being or mental health, and as quickly as possible get students the kind of support that they need.
There you go. Yes. I'll take the woman, is it person with ginger hair and the white shirt? Thank you.
Very not a woman, but okay. Fitting the question surrounding kind of like the experience of trans students specifically, with the sort of current political academic debate that has come up, particularly in light of the Gender Recognition Act reform, there's been a very dramatic rise of transphobia around the country that has seen a great deal of kind of hateful rhetoric on campuses, given quite a disturbing amount of space. And I guess I'd like to ask, how do you think sort of so-called freedom of expression for academics and people presenting ideas in academic spaces can be prevented from giving a harmful platform, a platform to sort of this harmful rhetoric that makes academic spaces quite unsafe for trans people?
Can I just ask, while you have the microphone, are there particular Birmingham issues that you'd like to raise, or are you raising the general question?
I mean, I think the general question as well, as there have been a lot of issues on a lot of academic campuses, but I think specifically at Birmingham there have been issues raised to me about certain guest speakers who have been able to talk, who may well hold and voice views that would make a space where they were invited unwelcoming to trans students.
Okay. It's an important question, because it takes us to the heart of what kind of a community a university is. And a university must be a community of diversity. It must be a community which understands and celebrates diversity. And going right back to the first point you made in your question, in a public culture which is often increasingly intolerant of diversity, universities must be places that can celebrate diversity and be comfortable with difference. And being comfortable with difference is a real challenge. So I think I'd probably say three things. The first is universities have to be places of free speech and free expression, and you only need to look at what happens in parts of the world where universities, take what's happened in Hungary recently, for example. When universities lose that, we lose the ability to model difference, and we lose the ability to be catalysts of change in the societies of which we are a part. So freedom of speech has to be a defining characteristic of universities. Nevertheless, freedom of speech needs to be appropriate in its expression, appropriate in its respect for diversity and for other opinions. And freedom of expression is also premised on the fact that views can and should be changed. And that takes me to my third point, which is to find appropriate ways of ensuring that all views are challenged. If universities are places of freedom of expression, they need to be places of challenge. And within that, I think it's critically important that all of the members of our community, students, staff, and in those who are guests within our community, feel comfortable in their identities within our community, comfortable with the values of our community, which are values of diversity and inclusion, but also comfortable with the way in which we create the opportunities respectfully to explore difference and to deepen our own understandings of people who hold different views. And if we cease to be respectful of difference, if we cease to be interested in difference, then the kinds of freedoms that we stand for, the kind of freedoms that we cherish in universities will be eroded over time. So what does that mean? I think that means that, to some extent, as you said right at the outset, we're standing for something which, in terms of some wider public cultures, is countercultural, but we should be proud about doing that. And secondly, in our own context, if there are particular issues that are causing individuals or groups within the community of the University of Birmingham concern, then we need to find appropriate ways of registering that and appropriate ways of ensuring that they feel supported and secure.
Yeah, Stevie,
just to add to that, I mean, the point as well around external speakers, we have a very clear code of practice around external speakers that includes guidance to the speakers themselves, that talks about the expectations of the university, and is also clear on the role of chairs to balance debate in discussions so that different voices can be heard.
Student who asked a question, wish to read on it?
Yes, thank you for the response. I guess I'd like to sort of direct to sort of what could actual practical ways of ensuring a space is safe and open to people who are underrepresented and may have difficulty being in that space in the first place, which includes trans people particularly. I'm all for diversity of opinion and sunshine and rainbows, but unfortunately that's often not the case that we experience. And I'd like to kind of ask if the panel recognises the difference between a diversity of opinion and the difficulty that faces someone when they are confronted in an academic space where any opinion being raised can be seen to have a certain amount of academic validity with, for example, a speaker, a thinker who effectively denies their existence. As a non-binary person, I am often confronted that it's apparently reasonable and valid and a case of opinion for someone to deny the fact that I exist in the first place, which isn't a diversity of opinion matter. That's a matter of basic safety and decency.
Yes, this is undoubtedly one of the most painful and difficult situations that as universities I think we face at the moment, and I don't remember it being like this in this way in the past. And we're kind of caught. You'll know what the public debate is like out there, you'll know what Twitter is like, you know what the language is like, what the abuse is like, and inevitably the university doesn't stand aside from society, it's a part of society also, and some of that, I suspect, leaks into some of the discourse in our university. Nonetheless, on the whole, I think compared to some of the spaces I see outside of the university is an amazing place to be compared to some of those other public spaces that we see. And I think we're caught between a law that says we must allow free speech, we must allow all views, and then another law that says we mustn't, instigate difficulty and hate amongst people. And, it is almost an impossible place to sit. But on the whole, I think most people would say we navigate that reasonably well. I do not think it's going to get any easier. And I think it's really difficult for all of us, and I absolutely recognise what you say, and it feels like we have to renegotiate things that we thought were just basic freedoms. We have to renegotiate them almost on a daily basis, and that's quite new, actually, for a lot of us.
Did you ask the question? Do you wish to redirect again? Okay, next up. Yep, to this chap here. In the grey top.
So students that live at home and commute often...
Speak up a bit, please.
Yeah, sorry. Students that live at home and commute often struggle to integrate with the university community, which negatively affects their academic experience. So my question is, why is it that no funding or other university resources are directed towards assisting this group in comparison to those living in university accommodation?
Accommodation question, so...
Yeah, it's obviously, thanks for raising the point. And I'd say from my experiences at other universities, commuting students are obviously are often overlooked. And I'd actually say Birmingham has them higher on the agenda than most, to be frank. I think what we need to look at this is it's important to recognise that from the start, the integration at the very start of their academic experience is probably the most important thing of all. And it's what steps are taken in that particular regard. You are, and I'm being very open with you, talking to somebody who hasn't been here yet at the start of an academic year. So I've got that to look forward to this particular September, start in October. But for the commuting students there, we have an agenda here, Life After 5, which is on campus, where I know the Vice-Chancellor is very keen to see the fact that we develop an atmosphere on campus whereby people feel free to stay and actually enjoy both the facilities. And we recognise that the importance of that, if you like, peer support, and the fact that that is the time when the community as a whole can come together, and we don't get that divide between commuter students and those who may be living in Selly Oak, or indeed those who are in our own residences. So I think there's a lot of work that we still have to do in this particular area. It's something that is on my particular radar, and I would be very welcome to hear and work with the Guild in terms of getting some input so I can look at that particular area.
To be fair, the issue of commuting students is actually something that's very close to my heart. I actually commuted during my final year from Liverpool / London whilst I was studying, so it's something that I think is crucially we get correct in third level education, not just at Birmingham but around the country. Stephen?
Yeah, just to add to that, I mean, I think, yes, it's been stated already that this is a challenging area, but it is an area where we've looked at a number of different things, both ourselves and indeed working with the Guild, in terms of students accessing what experiences might be on campus, whether that be ensuring buildings and spaces are open for long hours, extending the length of time that the hub is open for students to be able to access, the library opening hours, a whole host of things to try and extend and give opportunities for people who might not necessarily be able to just turn up on the campus but might have certain times that work for them and give them that space. We're also looking as we look at the timetable in terms of, well, how do we see what we can do there, trying to find ways where we don't group whole swathes of hours together, which might cause problems for commuting students. There is no easy answer to that because it's very complex and it involves all the other students on the same course, not just that one individual or group of individuals, but we are and continually look at that. And I was looking indeed at a paper this week discussing exactly that point about how do we improve and develop that further. I think the point's been made around Welcome Week and the early orientation. That's incredibly important, and that's something we need to do better at. And I'd be interested in your views and indeed other students' views on how we can reach further. We do have particular events in Welcome Week, but again, they require people being around. What we've also done, though, is invest a lot in online resources and online facilities. If you look at the interactions with the library, for example, the majority of those now are all online, indeed from anywhere in the country, and for that matter, anywhere in the world. The same is true with a lot of the materials we do through student services, careers, a lot more happening online, so people can access it elsewhere. What we want to do is work more with you, work more with the Guild on that particular community being here point, because I think that's an important one well made.
Can I just ask the question? Is there something obvious that you think we should be doing and are not doing I mean, I realise it's a big question, but just to give us something to work with?
I don't think there's one overarching issue. I mean, the point you raised with extending opening times for study spaces, I feel like the problem lies with study spaces not being available during the daytime. So people that live in university accommodation and in Selly Oak can very easily go home and use the study spaces at home, whereas commute students will struggle during the day. And after 5 o'clock, I've spoken with a lot of commute students. They have other commitments with family, picking up brothers and sisters after school. So engaging commute students in the evening time is sort of the opposite to what I personally think the resolution is.
Okay, thank you.
Did anybody wish to answer that statement? Or?
No, I think that was a helpful suggestion. And obviously, one of the things that we're doing at the moment with the various apps that we've got is try and give students more and more real-time information about where study spaces are available. And that's being rolled out, and the library is eventually going to be rolled into that, I think.
Yes.
So it will, I hope that is helping at the moment, and I hope as we continue to develop the technology, then it will go part way to addressing that point of students who don't live on campus or near to campus will always have appropriate places to study and indeed to socialise while they're on campus.
Can I, just before we go to the next question, use this to make a shameless plug? If you're following this on Guild TV or on Twitter, the hashtag is VCQT, so please tweet in any questions or observations you have, and we can try to pick them up in a spirit of interactivity. Next up, somebody over here I've already seen. Yep.
My question is to ask an opinion from the panel and Vice-Chancellor as to whether they believe there is an issue of sexual violence on campus and whether they believe the University of Birmingham's internal reporting tool, You Report, We Support policy of non-disclosure is adequate in supporting victims of sexual violence during their studies. With 1 in 3 undergraduate women worldwide reporting being victims of sexual assault during their studies, which is the United Nations VAW Report 2018, and 90% of victims knowing their attacker, this means we're fostering an environment of fostering a culture of assailants and victims sharing study spaces. Whilst I do fully appreciate the need for confidentiality and due process, however, it does seem to violate fair rights to education to contribute to a hostile learning environment by failing to disclose whether assailants will even be on the same campus as their victims. With 94% of victims also experiencing symptoms of PTSD, which will also adversely affect their academic experience. I would like to ask how the panel feel about this and how they would propose to deal with this to promote a just, fair and safe learning environment for all.
So I think we have some good policies on campus. I end up chairing the very difficult disciplinary panels that we end up with in this space. And most of those cases are extremely complex. I would say, however, that as soon as the evidence is clear, then I think we have a pretty clear record in how we then act. So it's important that in chairing those panels that I do, when issues arise and if they reach me, that I am able to take a fresh view, which I always do. But if there is evidence, then we always act to discipline. We are also constrained by the law. You need to remember that. We have to be fair to all parties, but where there is evidence, we act.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the question. It's a really important point, and one that the university, as you've just heard from Kathy, spends a lot of time looking at and seeking to make sure it can support its students. The You Report, We Support tool is one of the ways that the university looks to try and reach further. Some people can be put off from using the formal complaints process, so developing that, working with the guilds on the Not On campaign and so forth, are key ways we can say we're going to go further than simply saying come and report to the officialdom of the university, because the officialdom of the university can feel quite scary, quite nerve-wracking, and I think we absolutely understand that. We also then look to align support both from our own services and student services and then through some of the external bodies that we work with. We work very closely with the police, both through our on-campus police officer, but we also have regular meetings with the police looking at what we can do to support safer environments, not just on campus but elsewhere. In terms of particular cases, what we also do is we look at the detail and we work through to try and understand how can we restrict and limit the likelihood of two parties coming together again. And we limit locations. And I sign letters occasionally that will say to a student, I'm afraid following this situation, you are not allowed to travel to X or Y, so we can make sure that the victim who's alleged that individual has assaulted them is in a position where they can feel safe on their campus. But we do have to balance that, and we do balance that carefully because it's important that what we don't do is prejudge an investigation or prejudge a criminal investigation. So the angle is giving students the opportunity to report in a more informal way, that anonymous tool, through the formal routes as well, and then having support structures around that look to be as sensitive as they can be to support the student who may well have been assaulted.
You mentioned the On campaign. I'm actually a paid Not On ambassador as well, so I'm quite familiar with the process. And also you mentioned evidence. Because of being in Not On and with this familiarity with it, there was an incident that took place on university property last year that was caught on video camera that took 7 months for a response from this reporting tool, with the only letter being received saying, we believe that we've found the conclusion of our investigation satisfactory enough, however, we cannot tell you of any outcome. That was the last letter that person received. That does seem dissatisfactory because whilst I fully appreciate as both a student and I have two older brothers who also have a very different side of the story for all sorts of the issues that I raise, it still doesn't seem dissatisfactory in the way that people feel safe for that and even having trust in their support services and reporting tools. If there can even be an incident caught on camera on campus and it's taken 7 months for a response that is 2 sentences long, that's kind of the crux of my question. Also, I'd really like to ask the opinion of the panel as to whether they believe there is an issue of sexual violence on campus.
In terms of the point you raise around the individual case, again, without the detail in front of me, it's very difficult to comment on that in any detail. What I would say is I think we should be responding much sooner than that, and I think our response should be more fulsome than that, than simply 2 sentences, to take the point that you've made. I think that the point of that tool is so people can feel confident, and I wouldn't want anyone in this hall or anyone watching online to think, oh, I will not now report something. I'd encourage people to make sure they do report, notwithstanding the point that you've made, and I certainly will look at that in more detail when I get back. We are very efficient normally at dealing with this, so that's why I need to look at it in more detail, so I'm sorry about that in particular. In terms of your question, do I believe this campus? I think what I'd say is I think this is something that applies to campuses across the UK, which is, I think that sexual harassment and sexual assault is a bigger issue than people realise. And I think we're in a university that's responded with the tool as a way of trying to even understand that, because if we just rely on official figures, and I think a number of universities in the sector do that, it looks really small because of the inherent barriers that students may feel are there to going through officialdom. By expanding it to having a much more open tool, I think we've got a much better opportunity of really trying to see what's going on and how can we support our community in the same way I hope other universities can be as proactive and as positive as we're trying to be.
The question has been really interesting so far, but I'm afraid we're running a little bit over, so we're going to have to move on to the next section, which is student voice, which I believe is kind of ask us anything about issues that affect students at the university. Reese, I believe you have a question?
Cracking. This is one of the questions that have been submitted online. Do you feel students are listened to on their feedback and opinions for big changes on campus? How do you ensure you take students' perspectives before making a decision?
Professor?
Thanks for the question, whoever asked the question. What we try to do is operate through a number of different channels. So there are the formal channels. So students are represented on, indeed members of all of the key committees of the university and all of the governance structures of the university. So the student voice is there, is present, and is taken very seriously. So that's the formal. Then there are the informal, that is to say, and I think Cathy may want to comment on this in a moment, the way in which senior officers of the university who have responsibility for policies consult with students. There are, thirdly, the feedback mechanisms that we have at university level and at school level, which are taken seriously on and are acted on, and indeed are reported through to the University Executive Board that I chair. And the final thing I would say is that the many of us, and it would certainly include me, meet with students, listen to students, and are in dialogue with students. So if you look at the formal and the informal structures, the student voice is strongly represented. We're a university of 36,000 students. We're a university of students from, I think at the last count, 153 countries. We're a university with a very large undergraduate, postgraduate taught and postgraduate research community. So I think inevitably in a community of our size, there will be some students who feel that they are not being heard. But certainly from our point of view, and I think this is a view that's shared by the Guild, is the most important thing is for students to engage in those processes, because if students don't engage in the processes, then we won't hear the student voice.
Vice Chancellor Education?
Yes, so I would urge everyone to go in at the very entry level as course reps, programme reps. It's such an important part where we get to connect with students regularly and in the areas, the local areas where they're actually working and the issues that they're facing day to day. But we also, there are other ways in which we interact. So, only a couple of years ago, we decided we needed to take a long, hard look at our PGT student experience. We did that in connection with the Guild officer. We set up an entire change management program to collect views, staff, students, externals, alumni, prospective students, to look at what we were doing around our PGT provision. And as a result, we changed everything around the Welcome Week. If any PGT students are here, many of the things that happen with you now are a result of that joint working we did with our students to change the experience. We're now doing the same thing with the international student experience, following a very similar model, where we can better understand, first of all, what we need to change from a wide variety of voices, and then take the decisions we need to take to improve student experience. So it happens on a lot of different levels.
Next question, coming from you here. No, sorry, this person here.
Hi. So there's been an exponential rise in anti-Semitic incidents on campus. So the Birmingham Tab have reported of at least 3 extremely vitriolic hate crimes in the last semester alone. And there have been further reports on anti-Semitic instances on campus and even in the Guild. Particularly considering the current political climate and the lacklustre university response to these incidents, how are you suggesting to handle and respond to this in order to make a considerable difference to the life of Jewish and other students?
Professor?
Just pass the mic back. Thank you. Thanks for the question. What would a response that wasn't lacklustre have looked like?
So, from what I've seen, it was only actually the Guild and Ruth Roberts who responded to these incidents. There was nothing that came from the university on your level, and it was only ever an acknowledgement of we're investigating this, and never this is how we plan to challenge this. And that's the real issue. If these are happening, and they're happening with increasing regularity, why isn't there a response? Why isn't there a concrete plan to tackle it?
Not that it would necessarily have been read by all students, but I did respond in the column that I write in what is the university magazine, because it's something.
And for those who may not have read that, what did you say?
I said that these forms of behaviour have no place in a community like ours. I mean, I think it's absolutely straightforward. You know, what kinds of behaviours, it goes back to the freedom of speech question, what kinds of behaviours are acceptable and what kinds of behaviours are unacceptable. And I absolutely take the point too about the way in which, because of what's happening more broadly in society, anti-Semitic incidents, even if they're quite isolated, would have a particularly strong impact on Jewish students. Though it's not just, of course, Jewish students who feel very strongly about anti-Semitic behaviours. Lots of us who are not Jewish students find it equally unacceptable. I think the question that we have, and Stephen might want to comment on this, is in terms of our ability to respond, is getting evidence. It's getting evidence of who did. And I can remember probably before most of you were with us as students, we had a number of incidents across the campus of anti-Semitic signs and anti-Semitic language appearing. And we used all of our CCTV and all of our security to try to run to ground, who was responsible. And in some cases, of course, it was people from outside the university. It was people over which we don't have jurisdiction, and then it becomes a police matter, which we can refer on, but have no locus in. So I would stand absolutely shoulder to shoulder with you and fellow Jewish students. What we need, and we need to work together, is to do two things. One is collectively the way in which we police behaviours, because that's extraordinarily powerful. The values that we all share, hold, and embody. And secondly, where we can get the evidence, then it goes back to a point that Kathy made in response to an earlier question. Where we have the evidence, we will act.
Stephen, I believe you had an observation.
Yeah, just I think that's absolutely the point. We have, and we will act where that evidence is there. We do work in partnership with the Guild on some of those things as well, in the sense of there may be a disciplinary process within the Guild, and that may then plug into our process. The same is true for UOB Sports, where there may be disciplinary actions there, and then they come through the university's process. So we do, in any instance of anti-Semitism, the university would look to investigate that and would then act on the findings of that investigation. And as been noted, we've done that in the past and would always do that. It's prohibited within our code of conduct. It's morally repugnant, and one would expect us to respond, and we absolutely do.
Yeah. So I think it's all very well and very right for us to sort of condemn it, and when there is evidence to sort of act accordingly. My issue is that there is potentially a culture on campus that when it's seen as we prevent it when it happens, as opposed to creating a culture that doesn't allow it to happen in the first place. I feel like that is the fundamental issue, and I would ask how you propose to combat that and promote a culture that doesn't condone any form of racial hatred and anti-Semitism at all.
I mean, there's a project that we're just now working on, and we've been discussing with the Guild actually, which is called Bystander Training and Bystander Development. It comes from North America. And what it is it's a tool whereby we work across the student population to give every student the warrant to say that isn't acceptable, and feel confident that they can do so as part of a community that challenges behaviour that's inappropriate, the behaviour that might be unlawful, or the behaviour that's just totally unacceptable. And it gives people that sense of, yeah, actually, I'm going to be able to say that, and I'm going to be backed up by everyone around me who's going to challenge that as well. And so that, I think, is one of the ways that we can look to try and give tools to students across the campus to be able to say, hang on a minute, I don't think that's acceptable, and feel confident to say so, because those around them will also be aware of how to respond and the confidence they can have to respond to some of those particular points that might come through.
Next question. To the chap in the red jumper with the green shirt. you could keep your hand up, chap in red jumper with green shirt. Thank you.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. So one of the big issues facing postgraduate students is the amount we get paid for the teaching we do. It came up earlier that we have the great opportunity to teach here and get experience from that, and that's true. But when it comes to the amount we get paid for that teaching, and particularly the marking we do, that is a massive issue. And I'm a PhD student, and literally every PhD student I know, and other people who teach, come up against this issue. We, for example, may get 20 hours pay for marking, but then the amount of marking we actually do can take up to 40, 50 hours. And that's not only an issue for us, but when you think about it, it affects the wider student body, because we mark, I for example, mark undergraduate lab books, and I can therefore don't have the time to mark those well, and that's affecting them as well. It's affecting their education. So, and this is something we've complained about for years now. Nothing seems to be done with regards to how much we get paid, or the amount of time we're getting paid for. So, just want to know what's been done on this.
Thanks for the question. And I absolutely understand the issue that you're raising. And I thought we had addressed it, but clearly from what you're saying, we haven't. So I will... Well, yeah, obviously. Well, I'll take that back, because I mean the point is a point that's very well made, particularly for those who are effectively TAing on some of our large programs, and I absolutely accept that the time spent in marking is often substantially greater than the time spent face to face. But I think, Kathy.
Yes, I mean there should be and is a formula for all of this that calculates the amount of time things are taking. If it's not working, then, and it's not working in a local context, then we do need to investigate that, because I'm surprised, but I think we need to investigate it further.
Does the student ask a question you wish to be ready? Okay, next up. I'm going to tilt up so I'm missing anybody. On this side here, the lady in the hijab. Thank you.
Why is that an international student pays $500,000 for a bachelor's in science while a second student pays merely half of that? Do you recognize the pressure and burden that this instills on students and parents? And when such an imbalance exists, why are there not allowed flexibility in terms of their payment plans? Finally, what is the role of University of Birmingham in initially changing and providing flexibility in such reforms?
So, could you just repeat the nucleus of your question, please? Fees. So,
is the question about the fee differential between home and international students, or about the payment plan?
Both.
Okay. The reason that there is a fee differential between home and international students is that for home students, the UK government has invested very substantially in, and still does invest in their education. So there are a whole series of other income streams that university gets for high-cost subjects, for investment in some of the teaching infrastructure, and for the support of research. And we are a research university as well as a teaching university, and we believe passionately that our students benefit from being taught in a research-rich environment by active researchers who are in receipt effectively of public funding for their research. So the reason that there is a fee differential between the home and the international students is to reflect that difference in private and public funding between home and international students. When it comes to the payment of fees, Stephen might want to comment on this. But clearly, when we're admitting students, it's important that those students have the means to pay the fees which are associated with a programme of study, recognising that the university has a range of support, including scholarships, bursaries, and hardship. But where students have difficulties in meeting their fee payments, then the university has the ability both to intervene and to reschedule, and where there is hardship, to address that through our various hardship funds.
Stephen? Yep, just to add to that, I mean, I think it's a good question. I mean, I think the point is around the funding that David's already made. I think there's also a point in terms of access to funds, so it's a prerequisite when an international student applies for a visa that they demonstrate to the Home Office they have sufficient funds to pay for the cost of the education. So from a university perspective, we have to validate that as well. And what that means is as we go through and charge and how the payment plans are set up, it means we can continue with our sponsor license obligations, which is to continue to affirm that a student is in a position to pay for the education that they've said they're in a position to pay for when they've applied for the visa to enter the country. The payment plans that are there to try and help and try and break it down to make it easier for students to pay. Recognise that the total sum is a large amount of money, but that also recognises the difference between the costs that are met by the UK government for home students versus the costs that are not met for international students. And so whilst I understand that the challenge that you highlight, I think we'd always be interested in talking to a student who is experiencing any difficulty so that we can work with them and ensure they're able to pay the fees associated with it, to see what additional support might be available for them, to see how the payment plan might be able to evolve. Because what we're keen on is ensuring every student has the opportunity to continue to succeed at university. And that's why we put the plans in the first place, so that we're in a position that they can remain studying at the university.
That's maybe kind of more general interest. What's kind of the impact going to be of fees in the post well, I don't want to use the B word, but the post-Brexit situation for the university?
I think you should direct that question to the Prime Minister, who's absolutely on top of the Brexit issue. The answer is that on the assumption that there is a harder Brexit, at some point the government will shift its policy. So students from EU 27 countries won't have access to student loans and won't be entitled to home student fees. That, of course, is being rolled forward year on year. But
the university's
so the university's position is at some point EU 27 students will be reclassified as international students, and we will have no option, actually legally we will have no option, but to categorise them at that point as international students. Now, it may be that as we do with some other countries, we might have particular reasons. You could think about this in the context, for example, of some Eastern European countries. We might have particular reasons for wanting to have some dedicated scholarship programs in order to facilitate the development of higher education opportunities in those countries. But that's an issue for another day. Actually, the current issue for EU 27 countries is not access to student loan company funding, because they still have it. It's access to visas to study if there's a hard Brexit, because at the moment, unless the government changes its rules, they will struggle to get a visa to cover the full length of their programme. So that's the thing, actually, we are lobbying on at the moment.
Kathy?
Just the other thing I'd say is that, I don't know whether everyone appreciates this, and it is a very uncomfortable position to be in, but we as the university are positioned as a de facto border agency. We have the responsibility to maintain the government's rules such that our international students are able to keep studying here, and it's a really challenging position for us to be in.
Hello, I'm Joe, International Officer. I have continued questions to Vice Chancellor and Academic Registrar on the question of international and home student fees.
gaps. I've realized at the VC question time last year, you've also mentioned that the fees between the international and home students are due to graduate tax. And I've looked up at Office for Students Guide to Funding, and it states that the majority of the providers' income for teaching comes through students' tuition fee. And it does mention that only the funding from the government is covered for high-cost subject fees, which are listed as, the clinical years of studying like medicine, laboratory-based, and intermediate cost subjects as archaeology, but does not cover other intermediate cost subjects with laboratory, studio, or field work, or classroom-based subject as humanities. Therefore, what I understand is that 9,000 grand, what home students fees or home students pay, can definitely cover the teaching costs for what is spent to teach students who are studying in the classrooms. I myself, as political science student, I am classified as Band 1 classroom student. And 3 years ago, I paid 13 grand per year. And this year, September, for the exact same course, students have to pay 17 grand per year to take this Band 1 classroom subject. It's about twice as much cost of what home students have to pay. And with this understanding from Office for Students Guide to Funding, it is not classified as high cost subject funding. Therefore, it should definitely be covered within 9 grand or a bit more. I would like to have some explanation on this big gap between home student and international student fees.
A very good segue into section 3 of the evening, which is value for money. So, Stephen?
I think there's some interesting points. Thank you for that. I mean, I think one of the things I'd say is that the fee in a given year contributes towards the cost, and the university runs something called Track that shows us how the different contribution, as it were, to the running cost of the university can be calculated. I think what I'd say is that what we need to remember is part of the cost that might be given in a year doesn't recognise the investment that's been made over the preceding years in respect of the infrastructure, the building, the resources and so forth of the university, whether that be investment in resource, so it's not the given costs in 1 year that pays for the library. That was paid for over a number of years, and fees and costs that came from a variety of different sources. Many of the buildings you look around the campus would have been built and funded by the Higher Education Funding Council that preceded the OFS. There was absolutely central government funding looking at paying the costs of buildings that international students are able to take advantage of, but weren't necessarily a taxpayer at any point that contributed to that funding, and aren't necessarily from families that were taxpayers that contributed to that funding. So I think there is a differential. I understand the point about looking at it within 1 year, but actually the costs of building a university as substantial and indeed with the wide variety of offer that this one has take place over a number of years, not just the 1 year that the student's paying for accessing some of those facilities.
Does that answer your question, Robert? Quickly?
Well, from a student perspective, twice as much as the tuition fee, so half of it being funded to the university infrastructure that I won't be able to use within 3 years' time doesn't really make for value for money for myself. So I'll leave the question to the rest of the floor later.
Thank you very much. Next up is going to be the student in the red top here with the glasses on. If you could keep your hand held up in the air, please, so we can find you. Perfect.
Website, Kathy says, our dedicated team will be on hand throughout your studies to ensure that you have the best possible experience and feel safe, secure and supported during your time at UOB Dubai. How can you say this when we know that LGBT students on the Dubai campus cannot adequately be protected? Equally, as we've seen with the Matthew Hedges case, once in the hands of the UAE authorities, there's very little that can be done, and the university has little to no authority over there. Do you think this is value for money for student fees if I, as a queer woman, wouldn't be able to safely study there?
Paddy, I believe this is... No, this is not your area. Okay, Stephen. Yeah, I'm conscious of you.
Thank you for the question. I mean, I think, and it's a really fair challenge. I mean, I think from my perspective and the work that we've done, I think a lot of effort has been put into working with a number of parties, including the guilds and including the LGBT society, to try and identify and provide information to students so they can make an informed choice about whether or not Dubai is the destination that they wish to study in, and decide how they can be part of that Dubai community. The overwhelming majority of our students in Dubai, there are 100 students registered in Dubai at the moment, 97% of them, or 96% of them, are from the region, or close within the region. They're not coming from the UK, they're not coming from this part of Western Europe and so forth. They're actually coming from the UAE. They may have lived there for many years. That is the culture that they are part of. That is the culture that makes sense to them, and they're the laws that they have lived in for many, many years. The university operates within the law at each of its areas of operation. We operate around the world, and various parts of the world have differing laws, some of which I absolutely don't agree with when I think about things from a personal perspective. However, I think what we do need to do, and what the university is doing, and I have to say I think it's the right thing, is by being in Dubai, I think, and giving students the choice, absolutely the choice, we're in a good position then to work to develop the next generation of leaders that can look to challenge how Dubai operates in exactly the same way that other universities with transnational education have looked to deliver, whether that be in China, whether that be in Malaysia. I spent 9 months working for the University of Nottingham in Malaysia campus, looking at the environment and the life for students in Malaysia, and what that meant in Malaysia. Malaysia is a country where homosexuality is illegal, and indeed the government prosecute and have done in the past. I think the crucial thing, both there and indeed for us, is around ensuring we have policies and practice so people can choose whether they wish to go to that part of the world, can make the decisions that relate to them. They can also be confident, so we have a whole series of policies and practices on our campus where we will ensure we can have debate, we can have challenge on our campus. It's an important part of who we are as an institution. But what we can't do is ignore the law within the country that they're in the same way we don't disregard the law for the UK or the law for China or the law for anywhere else that the university operates.
So hold on. If we're operating within freedom of expression, that Professor Eastwood so lauded before, and yet we are allegedly operating within the law of what some may term autocratic, illiberal countries, then surely that goes against the freedom of expression that Professor Eastwood talked about, and with respect for diversity of opinion.
I think what I'd say in response... Oh, Kathy, did you want to...
I don't sometimes agree with the policy of my own country at the moment, but that's another issue altogether. And so I think one of the things it would be important to do is actually to connect with the students who are studying in Dubai, because they have a very different perspective. And that's where a lot of them are local to the region. They're getting an opportunity to get a University of Birmingham education that they absolutely would not get if we didn't have a campus in Dubai. We're hoping to grow those opportunities for students in that region, and we will operate well in that region. A lot of work has gone in to set this up as well as we can possibly do, and I think the more connection you can have with those students who actually don't very much like other people representing their views either, because they understand the context that they're in. So I think that's one of the ways we will break down some of the barriers, is by getting that contact. And they're very keen to engage with you, very keen.
Do you have any evidence to back up the claims you've just made there?
Absolutely, yes, because we had some issues earlier on and they felt they had been misrepresented, and we're going to make as many opportunities as possible for this interaction to take place. Clearly it can take place online, and some of those students want to come and spend some time here too.
Professor Eastwood?
Well, simply to confirm what Kathy just said, I was out in Dubai last month. I was with our students, I was with our staff. One of the things that strikes you when you're out there is the diversity of the student body, the diversity of the staff body, and as Kathy says, their very strong commitment to what we are doing there. And they are very keen to have that wider dialogue across the University of Birmingham. So what you find within the University of Birmingham Dubai campus is an engaged an open student body which is operating, as Stephen says, within the laws of the country, but also which is operating as an agent for cultural transformation, and that's what universities are for. And either you do it and you engage, or you stand aside. And I would submit if you stand aside, then change will be slower and more imperfect than change which is catalysed through those kinds of engagement.
Do you wish to just redirect very, very quickly?
Yeah, I think
very quickly.
I think everything that you've said as the panel just sort of begs the question: why we bothered to invest in Dubai in the first place if we knew that it was a country where LGBT students wouldn't be able to go to, if not just for the university's own capitalistic intent.
So why? Was it a business case? Was it a business case, or was it to do with delivering change, as you so say?
The reason that we established the University of Birmingham Dubai campus is because we believe there are very strong academic reasons for being there. We are a global university. If we're a global university, we operate in a global environment, and we do so in ways which are appropriate given our values.
Chap in the grey shirt here.
Chancellor, leading on from the discussion we've just had. In particular, with regard to Dubai, I want to ask a question about the reported £100 million contract signed by the Vice-Chancellor in February with regard to the opening of the Phase 2 of the Dubai campus with a company called Techcom Group, a wholly owned company owned by the Dubai authorities with a known record of human rights abuses and the exploitation of forced migrant labour. And in the context of value for money, I want to ask, when students are being told that we can't afford a living wage here in the Guild of Students because it's unaffordable, when there's over 600 cases on the waiting list to see a counsellor, with only 4 full-time, fully accredited trained counsellors employed, when accommodation's extravagantly expensive, 70% of staff here who teach are on some form of insecure or 0 hours contract, and when we're even being told that the Selly Express is an extravagance, it's showboating, I want to ask if the new... Okay, I'll get to the question. I want to ask specifically, if the Dubai campus were to close for whatever reason, we've seen other overseas campuses closing, Reading, UCL and others, or, God forbid, a student or a member of staff was detained in Dubai. Given that academics, not just here, but up and down the country, are boycotting this campus because of the failures on academic freedom, on LGBTQ rights, without spin, can you look at students here today and tell them what is the value of that contract that you signed in February, and how much will be lost if the Dubai campus were to close?
Professor Eastwood, very, very quickly, please.
So, just to pick, I mean, there were a couple of things that you touched on. You described the Selly Oak taxi service as a what? As a showboat? That it's something. It's okay. Just to be clear, because it's something that matters. It's something that's funded to the end of the year, and the Guild is considering where it sits in its order of priorities for next year, and that will be considered through the compact process. So there's certainly no view on the part of the university that the safety of our students and the transport of our students from campus back to Selly Oak is anything other than very important. if we take the question on Dubai, it's an important question. And in establishing the University of Dubai campus, we have looked at our partner, the employment record of our partner in building the campus, and we are satisfied with the conditions which we'll obtain. As far as the future of the campus is concerned, we have ensured that within the structure of the contract and the insurances that we have taken out, that the university is protected.
Thank you. Professor Easter.
Can we get the value on that contract? How much university funds have been put into this, given all the things we've been told here today
Sorry,
that we
how
can't...
much?
Well, given all of the things you've told us that we can't afford, what's the value of the contract that you've signed in February with Techcom on the Phase 2 expansion of the Dubai?
It's a 30-year contract, and the payback is cash positive to the university from 2026 onwards. So the University of Dubai is actually contributing to the University of Birmingham Group, not a cost to the University of Birmingham Group. So the University of Birmingham Group as a whole will benefit, and students studying here in Birmingham will benefit from the University of Birmingham Dubai.
Do you have any observations you wish to make as a closing statement? Because I believe you have to rush off to another meeting.
I have another meeting at 7 o'clock. It's the way my diary tends to work. Well, what I'd like to do is I'd like to thank everyone for joining us this evening. It's one of many ways in which we engage with students. The issues that you've raised, in a number of cases, I hope that you've got answers which are appropriate. In a number of cases, too, you can see that me and colleagues will be taking those issues away and addressing them. And we will follow up those issues through the normal interactions that we have with your elected officers and through the twice-monthly meetings we have between guild officers and the university executive board. So it's part of the way in which we continue to enhance the experience of our students. And I want to thank you for your engagement, and I want to thank you for the support that you give to the community, because going back to those questions about students feeling comfortable within our community and the values of our community, those values are most powerfully embodied and expressed and demonstrated right across our student body, and that's what makes the University of Birmingham the place it needs to be. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. Kathy?
It's been really interesting. You've raised a couple of things that we want to take back. On the whole, I think it was a couple of the questions that, really, we have to protect our university community from some of the stuff that's going on out there, which is unpleasant. And we have some students here on campus who are feeling uncomfortable, threatened, and I think all of us, that is the last thing a university is, the very last thing. And if there's one thing I think we can all agree on, that we must support each other through that. We can't shut out the real world. We have to manage it here within our community.
Paddy, how do you find your first Vice Chancellor's question time?
Well, it's my first at this university, not my first overall, and I think I'd just reflect for myself and say it's lovely to hear you as a student body talking about the big issues. I can't tell you how many times I've been at these occasions and been pinned to the wall about chicken burger prices and things of that nature. But actually to hear the more meaningful discussions that are going on with the larger issues that's what's quite heartening to me. Equally, that's not to say that the other side of student life isn't important, and affordability has got to be at the heart of what the university's agenda has to be in my particular areas, to recognise that we have to service the entire student body. So I am working with the Guild quite closely in that regard to build on that. We'll talk at another time about a couple of initiatives that we're undertaking, which we hope will suit what students actually want in sort of the areas that support student life, but as I say, aren't as nearly important as some of these matters that you've raised here tonight.
Stephen?
Just to thank everyone for having us here this evening. It is a really good opportunity to hear the concerns that people have. I think what I'd say is there's never enough time for these sorts of conversations. And so where there may be additional points or things that, and I know Reece is going to have a discussion, I think, to see if there are any other points that have arisen. I think I'm sure my colleagues will be very happy to pick up on those issues that Reece might identify. So if there are questions and so forth that you have, please do speak to Reece about it, and he brings it in the regular discussions with the university. And the only other final point I'd say is, and it picks up on a very early point that someone mentioned around the understanding or indeed the general understanding in the student community around the wellbeing service. The service actually does not have huge waiting lists that means student at risk will not be seen. Please come forward. If you're a student, anyone's watching online who feels particularly anxious, who feels like I really need help, do not be put off from coming forward. The service triages everyone, which means you get seen, and then you'll see someone either immediately if you're incredibly urgent, you may be referred to the emergency services if you're in crisis, or you'll be seen within a particular time frame that works for you as well. So where you hear quotes of 600 on a waiting list, actually much of that will be, let's find a time that works for you and a time that works for us. It doesn't mean there's a queue of 600 people waiting to see a counsellor down the corridor. If you're worried about anything, do come and see us. It's really important you know the services are there for you.
Can I just say thank you all for attending, and thank you to those online, obviously, for watching as well. Obviously, these things are great, they're wonderful, they're a fantastic feedback opportunity. But, as I said earlier on, the hashtags there, VCQT, feedback your kind of queries and questions to the officer team via their respective emails and also via their hashtag, and hopefully we can get a conversation going here at the university. It's always a pleasure to come back to Birmingham. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alice. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you.